Good morning and happy Easter to everybody. I have put together, before I go into present a slideshow, I have put together a presentation for everybody that is interested in psychology, neuroscience and music, maybe not in that order. This is a music-based neuroscience project or paper that I am going to present to you today. So just to introduce myself, my name is Gemma Watkins. I am a music and psychology graduate from the University of Basal as a combined undergraduate degree, which I did in the last 3 years. I am currently in the University of Bristol doing a master's degree in molecular neuroscience. But the content that I'm sharing with you today is not related to any of the institutes that I have either studied at or am currently studying at. This is for recreational purposes. So the purpose of the content today is to share a little bit about what I do as a professional musician and music teacher, and also linking that in with a subject that I'm currently studying, which is neuroscience, and that I have studied, which is in terms of psychology, but this is more neuroscience based. So if you're interested in those subjects, this will be the content for you. Hopefully it will share some interesting findings from a study that was conducted by a guy called Haslinger and his colleagues. The paper was released on the 22nd of July 2004. So it's fairly historic data and academic research, but unfortunately there isn't any current research on this particular topic. So this is the latest that I could find. There are some more current fMRI studies that were or have been conducted in 2015, but they are related to the emotions as opposed to the recruitment of motor association areas in terms of bimanual coordination. So this is the only study that I could personally find. If you find anything more current, please do let me know in the comments. I'll be interested to see, but I think that forms the basis of a compelling reason as to why this or why further exploration is required, particularly from potentially from a medical point of view, as to how it could do many things, and we can discuss that in clinical trials and future directions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I am going to go into the presentation. Just before I continue, this work is not my own, and to avoid any doubt around plagiarism, the reworkings of the paper are cited, and I do not claim to own the content of this material. I've simply put it into a more digestible format for my audience. The work originates from Haslinger and his colleagues, and there are various other citations that have been extracted from other research within the content. The citations are within the body of the text that you can see in the presenter notes, and then these will be in the references at the end. I haven't included all the references because they are such a long list. It's taken up 3 slides. So if you are wanting access to those resources and to further explore the topic, you will find the references within the paper. So if you put the title into a Google search or Google Scholar search, you will be able to find it. And so I'm going to get on with the presentation. So let me share my screen with you. Okay. So what you should see on the screen is a introduction slide which shows the topic with which I'm going to cover, which is reduced recruitment of motor association areas during bimanual coordination in concert pianists. And as I said, this paper was done by Haslinger and colleagues in 2004. So bimanual synchronized finger movements play a crucial role in piano playing, with pianists practicing scales bimanually on a daily basis from the onset of their training. I must confess that I do not practice my scales every day, and should. Bimanual is effectively simultaneously, so the usage of both hands. These movements involve antiphase, which is a parallel finger movement, which are compared experimentally in this particular paper to in-phase mirror movements, showing their complexity and stability. And there's the citations for you there. Functional imaging studies highlight the involvement of various brain regions in bimanual coordination, including the supplementary motor area, which is the SMA, the cingulate motor cortex, the CMA, the dorsal premotor cortex, which is the DPMC, the prefrontal cortex, and the cerebellum. These are brain regions, along with the interhemispheric communication via the corpus callosum. Long-term practice among professional musicians leads to adaptive changes in the sensor motor systems, evidenced by structural studies showing increased size of hand motor cortex, corpus callosum, and grey matter density within specific brain areas like the Broca's area. Functional studies on musicians reveal cortical finger representations and auditory tone representations are enlarged, while predisposed individuals may experience motor reorganization issues such as task-induced dystonia. Professional musical training also influences unimanual motor tasks affecting motor activation patterns, corpus callosum size, and the transcallosal inhibition and cerebral structure, enhancing bimanual abilities. So effectively what this study is looking at is it's a functional study to do with the motor ability of professional concert pianists that undergo specific tasks or musical practical related tasks, for example, scales. And this looks at how those particular cortical finger representations, along with auditory tones, and I'll go into how this study was conducted shortly, actually affects particular areas of the brain. And there's a whole load of areas that I've reeled off to you there. For example, the Broca's area, and so how it can actually enhance, so how it benefits these bimanual or multi-hand abilities within professional musicians. So the piano playing requires bimanual both hands coordination. Hassinger and colleagues conducted this particular study in 2004, but the functional neuronal substrate for high-performing bimanual professionals was not clear when they did the study. So just to that was a summarization of the previous slide. The neural substrate is a term that is used in neuroscience, which indicates the part of the central nervous system, which I've illustrated on the right-hand side of the brain. So this is the central nervous system here. That underlies specific behavior, cognitive processes, and psychological states. This neural is an adjective relating to a nerve or the nervous system, while substrate is an underlying substance or layer. I've taken that from Wikipedia because it's just a very straightforward definition. We wouldn't usually use Wikipedia in academia, but I thought it was just a nice straightforward explanation as to what the central nervous system is and what that then affects in terms of behavior and cognitive processes. So going back into this particular study, a comparison was made between professional pianists and musically naive controls. So just to explain what that means, professional pianists was considered to be concert pianists. So not just a professional pianist like myself. I don't claim to be a concert pianist like Yuja Wang or Lang Lang, for example, but of that caliber. And musically naive controls means non-musicians, so people or controls. And the control group, when you do an experiment, you have to have a control group and an experimental group to compare and contrast the findings to see if there's any differences between the two groups. So the naive controls were those that hadn't undergone any musical training. So these particular comparisons involved carrying mirror in phase and parallel antiphase by manual sequential finger movements, which I talked about in the slide before. So it was effectively done. This particular task was done during an assessment using the functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is the fMRI. And if you look at this particular slide, you've got a picture of Yuja Wang, who's a professional concert pianist. I particularly like that image. And then you have got fMRI scan images conducted by this particular chap here. And if you look at, there's a machine that they would have gone in that particular study. In this particular study, they wouldn't have gone in the machine because they've been undergoing tasks. So they had particular apparatus and equipment that were they were connected to in order to take those readings. So functional activation patterns were actually observed. So they did see activation. Activation means an igniting in the brain. So they could see that neural pathways in particular hemispheres of the brain or particular brain regions were actually activated when the tasks were being undergone. So this particular comparison, the performance of these parallel movements. So not only did they have the two groups, they actually compared two different types of conditions. So it was the parallel and the mirror conditions. And the rest showed that the naive control actually had stronger activations than pianists. Now, when you read that, or when I first read that, I thought, oh gosh, yeah, okay. So pianists have less activation. That means that maybe they haven't got an advantage, or it isn't better for them, but that isn't actually the case, and I'll go on to explain why. So the task, what they had to do. So the experimental procedure involved participants performing two types of externally paced bimanual finger tapping tasks, because of course the naive controls wouldn't have had or wouldn't have been able to undergo scales because they're non-musicians. So when you do an experiment, you have to create, when you're doing the two, they have to do exactly the same in order for it to be a non-biased, a robust experiment. If you don't have the same tasks, then it's a null, the experiment is not valid. They have to be undergoing the same tasks. So that's why they replicated a particular type of task that was similar to that of a concert pianist, but that could be undergone by musically naive participants. And so this involved tapping tasks using the index finger to the little fingers on both hands. In the first task, participants were required to perform parallel finger movements, that's in motion, similar motion, starting either with the index finger of the right hand and the little finger of the left hand, or vice versa. And this involved continuous bidirectional finger movements, sequentially engaging those particular fingers, the index finger, the middle finger, the ring finger, and the little finger of one hand, and similarly to the other hand, with one finger per hand moving simultaneously. In the second task, the participants were performing mirror-like finger tapping, where corresponding fingers in both of the hands moved simultaneously in a bidirectional sequential order. The movements were executed using custom-built non-magnetic button boxes. So it's a little bit about the equipment that was used and how they underwent the task, each with 4 buttons for each hand placed beside the participant's trunk. The participants rested their arms on cushions with their wrists, hands supported prone on the button boxes, and this is for their comfort. The external pacing tones generated by a computer were used to trigger the movements at a rate of 1 tone per second continuously throughout the entire session, including the rest and activation phases. Participants were instructed to react to the tones without anticipation, pressing only 1 button per hand at the time. Prior to scan, participants practiced the task for 15 minutes to ensure familiarity. So these task instructions were conveyed to the participants via a computer image projected onto a transparent screen using a video projector, and the screen displayed German words indicating rest periods. So this is where this particular study was carried out. Parallel finger tapping or mirror finger movements. The scanning room was fully darkened and participants viewed the screen using a mirror positioned above their eyes. So the study was looking at functional activation patterns, and that's what they observed between the controls and the musicians. So they saw that there were activations within certain brain regions, and that were seen in the fMRI studies. A comparison of the performance of these parallel movements and rest showed that naive controls actually had stronger activation patterns. And where this was seen, so what I've done is I've actually illustrated the particular brain regions for you so that you can see. So this was seen within the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the right dorsal premotor cortex, and both cerebellar hemispheres and the right basal ganglia network. So here's the anterior cingulate cortex here, what it's involved in, and that actually this is a particular area of the brain that is activated in a variety of tasks. So this is taken from this particular website here. So not only does what that sort of backs up is that it's a particular brain region that is activated during tasks. The cingulate has been implicated in motor planning of movements, especially when they are novel or require much cognitive control. So this is to do with movement and tasks. This is the it plays a crucial role in various cognitive and emotional processes, including cognitive function, emotional regulation, pain processing, and autonomic function. So cognitive control of the ACC is involved in monitoring and regulating cognitive processes such as attention, decision-making, error detection, and conflict resolution. So it helps to identify when there is a conflict between competing responses, options, and initiates adjustments to optimize those performance. So it's doing stuff within the brain to ensure that performance is optimized when those tasks are carried out. So emotional regulation, this region is also implicated in emotional regulation. So it has various things that it does, one of which is obviously to do with the actual motor ability, the tasks that it conducts in the activation of that particular brain region. The other part is actually how it's regulating emotions. Particularly modulating, so it's affecting and controlling or tweaking the emotional responses to stimuli. So if you're being affected by something, or something is there's a situation, a scenario, that's the stimuli, and it regulates those emotional experiences. So if something's stressful, it helps to potentially relieve some of that stress. So what that means is if there's a dysfunction in the ACC, this can be known to cause various psychiatric disorders, which are characterized by emotional dysregulation. So, for example, depression and anxiety disorders. But not only that, it is involved in pain processing. So this particular brain region is involved in the perception of processing of pain and plays a crucial role in evaluating the emotional and motivational aspects of pain, as well as modulating. So modulating is to deal with, and actually in modulation music, if you modulate in music, you're changing key. So it's modulating the pain perceptions, it's changing the pain perceptions through descending modulation pathways. So particular pathways that modulate those experiences or those feelings of pain. That's what that does. So that's to do with the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC. It's also connected with brain stem, which is this part of the brain here, which we saw on the previous slide. And what that means is that it controls the autonomic functions such as the heart rate. So autonomic obviously being automatic, because we don't want to have to have our heart rate done on a manual basis. This happens automatically, otherwise we wouldn't be here. It deals with the blood pressure and respiration, so our ability to be able to breathe. It can influence these functions based on the individual's emotional state and cognitive processes. So these results revealed that signal increases were actually stronger, as previously stated, in the direct bimanual parallel to mirror movement comparisons with controls specifically within the mesial premotor cortex, which is the SMA, the bilateral cerebellar hemispheres, and the vermis bilateral prefrontal cortex, left ventral premotor cortex, and the right anterior insula and the right basal ganglia. So I've actually illustrated some of these brain regions on this particular slide for you, which are taken from the various websites that I've put on the screen for your information. So this is the results. This is one image from the results. I couldn't actually extract another image, so I could only get figure 1. I couldn't get figure 2. So if you want to be able to see figure 2, then just refer to the paper because it's within that. But it's very interesting. It illustrates and shows that the results revealed signal increases that were stronger in the controls. in those particular brain regions. And so this particular figure here illustrates heightened activations that were observed in musically naive controls related to the professional musicians. So whilst they were executing parallel movements compared to resting state, the significant clusters of activation had a statistical threshold of P 0.001, which means it's significant. I'm not going to go into P data. That is another presentation. So these are significant clusters. So it's showing that effectively that this study was showing strong activations in those particular brain regions, which were uncorrected, and a minimum extent of 10 voxels. That's the 10 voxels is the form of measurement, which were depicted on a consecutive axial slice of T1 weighted anatomical MRI, which underwent a stereotactic normalization in the MNI standard space. So the right side of the image corresponds to the right hemisphere, and the positions of the slices within the standard space are indicated in millimeters. These are your brain slices here, relative to the anterior commissure. And I will just explain what figure 2 shows, but unfortunately I couldn't extract the image. Please refer to the paper. That particular image displays brain regions where musically naive controls exhibit functionally or significantly stronger activation compared to the professional pianist when analysing the performance. So this is effectively 2 images, one showing the activations in parallel movements, one showing in the antiphase. The mirror condition, and this is versus the mirror condition in phase movements. The statistical threshold used a P of 0.01, which is uncorrected, again statistically significant, with a minimum cluster extent of 10 voxels, again the form of measurement. These regions of activation are superimposed onto sequential actual slices of T1 weighted anatomical MRI, which has been stereotactically normalized to the MNI standard space. The right side of the image corresponds to the right hemisphere again, as seen in figure 1, and the positions of these slices within the standard space are indicated in millimeters. Therefore, it suggests that the increased efficiency of cortical subcortical systems, the bimanual movement control in music. So what this is saying is that whilst the activation in non-musicians is stronger, that doesn't mean it's more efficient. They're having to work harder because they haven't built up it's like weight training. They haven't built up the muscles. They haven't built up the brain muscles in order to do that automatically or just without thinking. It is a stronger activation because they're having to work harder. The increased efficiency of the motor association networks is observed in musicians, and this stems from various functional aspects of task computing, which is presumed to be more robustly engaged in untrained individuals. So the paper posits that the requisite precision in motor timing for synchronizing both hands in higher among musically naive controls and diminishes with prolonged motor training in pianists. So the longer you're training in doing music, the precision requirement and motor timing for both hands is not needed for motor training in pianists. This proposition finds support in functional imaging studies, which were also conducted by various other colleagues there in previous studies to this, particularly elucidating higher cerebellar signal levels and controls compared to pianists during complex antiphase tasks. Moreover, the heightened level of attention required to execute demanding antiphase of bimanual movements may further explain the amplified signal increases observed in musically naive controls compared to professional pianists. So this is evidence within both the anterior and cingulate cortex and the prefrontal cortex areas of the brain. So additionally, intensified activations in the anterior cingulate and the prefrontal regions could be attributed to elevated demands for movement selection. So let's just say that additionally intensified activation, so that those stronger pulses, those stronger activations in those specific brain regions could be attributed to, or the reason for those is to the need for more demand for the movement selection and online monitoring of task performance and error detection. In this context, the heightened cerebellar activations and controls may be associated with monitoring and optimizing movement outcomes through somatosensory feedback. So due to the long-term motor training, this acceleration in difficulty from mirror to parallel movements is mitigated in pianists. It's alleviated, it's not required, it's diminished. Pianists do not need that intensity or that escalation in difficulty. The comparative lack of bimanual motor training in musically naive controls can be construed as an augmentation in motor task complexity, likely contributed to amplified activations in the pre-supplementary motor areas, which is the pre-SMA, the dorsal premotor cortex, which is the DPMC, the ventral premotor cortex, which is the VPMC, and the cerebellar structures in these particular individuals. So these areas have been previously linked to motor complexity. So contrasted with other studies on bimanual motor tasks in untrained individuals, these facets of higher order motor control could underpin more pronounced differences in rostral, premotor and prefrontal activation between controls and pianists when comparing parallel versus mirror movements. So as with any study, there will always be limitations within the studies themselves, and there will always be future directions for further exploration. So the limitations of this particular study were that there were methodological variations. So previous studies on bimanual motor control in healthy individuals have focused on different aspects such as mesial and lateral premotor activations, which were not fully covered in the in this particular study. So there's different brain regions that were not concentrated on. Additionally, variations in motor tasks, so to do with the type of task that they did, including different types of bimanual movements and self-paced movements, which make direct comparisons particularly challenging. And actually, kinematic recordings were not actually taken in the fMRI scanning, and this could actually affect the interpretation of the findings. So the kinematic data could have provided actually additional insights into the coordination and execution of bimanual movements. And there were a lack of sample differences. The study compared highly trained pianists with untrained controls, while this contrasts is so whilst this contrast is informative, it also means that differences observed may not be solely attributable to music expertise, but could be influenced by other factors such as general motor skill or cognitive ability. So they hadn't alleviated the conditions, so other biases that could actually have influenced the way in which they, or the influences of those particular motor skills and cognitive abilities. So task complexity, the bimanual motor tasks used in the study were well established, but they were not fully capturing the complexities of actual real world musician performance, which is quite impossible to do when you haven't got, when you're comparing musically naive and musically professional groups. The musicians engage in a wide range of motor tasks beyond finger tapping, and the specific demands of musical training may influence brain activation differently compared to the tasks used in this particular study. So that's one to think about. The limited scope of the analysis is that it focused primarily on the cortical and subcortical activations, potentially overlooking other relevant brain regions or neural networks involved in bimanual motor control. So the interpretation of activation levels, while musicians exhibited no significant differences in activation levels between parallel mirror movements, so the two tasks, there was no differences between the two tasks that they did within the pianist, it's essential to consider that activation levels alone may not fully reflect the efficiency or skillfulness of motor performances. And actually, this is not really a generalizable study that can be generalized to other populations or individuals with different levels of musical training or motor expertise. But that all being said, despite these limitations, this study does provide valuable insights into neural mechanisms underlying bimanual motor controls in musicians and musically naive individuals, highlighting the importance of motor training and experience in shaping brain activation patterns. And I've actually managed to do that under 30 minutes, which is fantastic. So that is the study. What it really emphasizes is that actually musical training is so good for motor ability, and this is evidencing that. So it creates ease within those particular processes, and ease of neuronal function. Further emphasizing and validating the importance of musical training and how that can actually assist individuals in many different ways, which is open for your consideration and further exploration. And looking at some of these limitations, it'd be interesting to develop this study further. These are some of the references, not all of the references, but please do refer to the paper, which was at the start here, the Hasinger, and that's the title of the piece of work that I've covered today, which is the reduced recruitment of motor association areas during bimanual coordination in concert pianists. And hopefully now that I've gone through the presentation, you are now fully informed as to what that means and what effect that has, and the benefits of musical training on these particular motor association areas within the brain. I hope you found that useful. It's been great talking to you. Until next time.